Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever it is while you're listening to this. I'm Grant Lindenberg, and welcome to Pushing Cardboard number 24. Today's main feature is an interview with Will Bauer. Will is a PBEM friend of mine, and he's taken a deep dive into the Levy and Campaign series, so that's what we're going to talk about today. As well, there'll be the usual news and chit-chat, grousing and praising. I'm trying something new this episode. If you go to the pushingcardboard.com website and look under podcasts, you'll see an item called Podcast Surveys. After listening to this episode, go to the website and check it out. It links to surveys about different episodes. If you fill in the survey for this particular episode in the first few weeks after this episode is first published, your name will be entered into a draw for a free game. You have to be a logged in registered user of the website to enter. But note that the survey can be completed without logging in or registering. You just won't be eligible for the prize, because how would I find you? If you've got a question you'd like answered or a topic discussed, drop by the website as well, or drop me a line at grant@pushingcardboard.com. I'd be happy to add a mailbag portion to the podcast, of course, and topic ideas are always appreciated even when I can't act on them. Okay, time for news. The biggest news this past month has not been good. First, Lock and Load Publishing has been catching heat for being late on a Kickstarter delivery. Owner David Heath has sent out a vague post saying everything's okay. He's had some non-Lock and Load related issues, but things are still proceeding just later than they would have liked. Hopefully all that gets straightened out soon. I'm less hopeful about the Heroes of Normandy series. Apparently the original owner sold the rights, and then maybe they were sold again. I'm not clear on the full history. But it appears the original creators were still working for the new owners churning out product. Something has happened, and those folks have now been locked out, and no one has any idea of what's going to happen to the products in the pipeline, some of which have already been paid for on pre-order. It doesn't sound like a situation where everything's going to turn out for the best, at least not from what I can tell so far. In better news, in the latest GMT update, I was excited to see that Volume 4 of Last 100 Yards is close to shipping. This is the Russian expansion. It'll be interesting to see what's new when the series shifts to the East Front. And also, their fall sale is back. It starts November 13th, so don't miss that. They have a few new games on their P500 list. There were two in particular that caught my eye. One is The Battle for Sicily. It's by Danny Holt, who is the designer of Battle for Normandy, also by GMT. In fact, I think he's sort of a D-Day specialist. I have a couple of other much smaller D-Day games by him. In any case, Battle of Sicily looks good, although it also looks sort of huge, much like his Battle for Normandy. I'm not sure I'll take it on. But the other game on P500, that's a killer for me. It's on Ortona, a subject I've been craving a new game on for years, banging on to anyone who will listen. And then finally, a beautiful new game is announced, and it's a solo game. Heartbreak. I wish the designer the best, but I'm also just back to feeling like I'm never going to get a good Ortona game. There's two upcoming events that I'd like to be at, but they're on the same weekend, so I can only hit one. I'll be missing BotisCon in Vancouver. New Westminster, really, but I'm trying to help non-Canadian listeners picture where it is. This event has been recommended to me by designer Brian Train, and then I recently met Rob Bottis online when someone passed along the podcast to him, and he stopped by either the website or the Discord. I can't remember. Anyway, seems like a great event and a nice fella. I'm sure I'll make it out there sooner rather than later. But that weekend, I'll be at San Diego HISCon. I've got several games lined up to play, as well as a couple of interviews scheduled to do. It should provide for some interesting listening in the next couple episodes, and hopefully I'll find a few more folks to corner for interviews as well. Over at Compass, their annual catalog is out. I only have the online copy. I'm not sure if they even mail them out to Canada, but I kind of love it every year. Their catalog is so old school. There doesn't seem to be a tremendous amount of organization or planning. It's just a box after box with a description and cover shot of every game in their catalog along with the sale price. I totally recommend you check it out if you haven't seen it. What's on the table? Well, mostly the same stuff as last time, but a couple of new things and a few updates. I'll just hit the newer stuff, I think, this time. I've been playing a lot of Nevsky and Mark Herman's Waterloo 1815 on the Rally the Troops website. I'm sure it's not just me, but my playing of those titles has skyrocketed since they've been added to that site. I'm also even playing a game of Andean Abyss. I don't find that one quite as satisfying. Nothing to do with the game. It's just that PBEM takes much more work to follow in a multiplayer game compared to a two-player game. So the two-player games, you can just see what's happened just with one other person, and it's kind of easy to know what's going on. Here at home on my learning table, playing solo, I've been sort of bashing my way into Norway 1940 by Trafalgar Editions. The rule book was originally in Spanish, and the English translation is great in terms of translation, but the rule book itself is full of holes. You really have to make a few assumptions, get the pieces out, and just see if things make sense. The publishers are helpful with answers, but they're not exactly speedy, as they're not on BGG much. No surprise, as they're Spanish speakers, so perhaps that website doesn't hold a lot of appeal for them. Anyway, I'm feeling like there's a really interesting game in there. I figured out so far how to get it set up and played through the initial invasion and a couple more turns. I'm meeting a friend in San Diego, and we've pledged to give it a try. I'll let you know how it works out. I also continue to play on Vassal, Command and Colors Napoleon with Mark Benson, designer of the Vassal module for that game. He's automated so many things. It's a great module, though it probably takes a bit of getting used to after using the less automated versions. He sent me the test copy of the newest version he's working on so that we can play test it, and so far so good. The only downside of all this playtesting is that Mark is a terrific player, and I'm constantly losing to him in those playtest games. Did I mention Blind Sword's Kernstown last time? Paul and I have moved on from A Most Fearful Sacrifice, and we're giving this Blind Swords game a go, playing the first Kernstown battle. It's a very different feeling from other Blind Swords games I've played. Firstly, because there's so few units on such a large map, but more interestingly, each leader just commands a single unit. So when you draw a leader chit, you don't choose which of his units to activate. You're stuck with a single unit. It feels a bit more like an old school chit pull game in that respect. Okay. All the other things I was playing previously, still playing, tons of ASL, a few other games going on, but I've got a lot to get through today, so we can talk about that next time. New games in the collection, not a ton, but a few. I can't help myself. ATO magazine's new issue grabbed me. The included game is called Clash of Carriers: The Battle of the Philippine Sea. I've been on a bit of a learning jag with the Pacific War, so I couldn't resist that. This period, the only pre-order to suddenly show up and surprise me and my wife was Downfall from GMT. This is a game that Chad Jensen was working on when he died. It's been finished by his good friend John Butterfield, and has finally shipped. I expect to see lots of AARs about this one. I'm sure it's going to generate a fair bit of interest. Those two games, I did unboxing videos of both of those. If you're interested in seeing either one, I'll put the links to those in the show notes. And I should also say show notes. Podcasters always say I'll put links in the show notes, but I know you're driving around, or you're on your bike, or you're mowing the lawn, or whatever you're doing, shoveling the snow, and you can't really. There's no show notes that show up when this drops in Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever. So if you want to see the links, I try to put them in where they'll drop into your player, but they don't. It depends on your player. It doesn't always happen. So if you go to the website pushingcardboard.com, there's a page devoted to every episode of the podcast, and I try to put the links of things we talk about there. So check that out if you're interested in the stuff I mentioned. Is going to be in the show notes. This period, I also participated in a math trade, so I managed to send a few things out, which was good, cleared a little space on the shelves. Coming back so far, the only game I've received so far is a copy of Napoleon's Last Battle, or Last Gamble, I should say, Napoleon's Last Gamble, Battles of the 100 Days, and included in that was its two expansions, So now I have a couple of these Library of Napoleonic Battles games to dive into. And then finally, the only other thing I went out and bought a copy of was I got a copy of Coral Sea Campaign Commander series. Uh, I've been interested in this for a while. Internet gadfly Judd Vance says the rules are awful, but it's a great game if you get through them. And I think Judd has actually written and posted a rewrite of said rules on BGG, so I'll check that out before I dive in. Newbie tips. I had a couple of folks on Discord on the website say they'd like an episode or a segment devoted to new players. I'm going to try and make it into a regular segment and perhaps also post whatever I get into here as a resource on the Pushing Cardboard website. Maybe sort of just a place to round up all these things for newer players. For this first installment, I want to talk about acronyms. This is definitely a good candidate for a web resource. So write in with any that you think should also be on the list. I'm not looking for acronyms for games here, as that list would be endless, but more things that get thrown around like everyone knows what we're talking about. Sometimes it's not even acronyms. It's just things we take for granted that everyone should know about, but maybe they don't. So I'll start with a few to get us started. Vassal, Vassal. This is an application that lets two or more players play a game on their computer either in real time or by sending log files back and forth across the internet. It's programmed in Java, so it doesn't work on your iPad, but it does work on Macs and Windows and Linux and probably even Pi or whatever. It was originally designed specifically for advanced squad leader, hence its original name was VASL, not VASSAL, as in virtual ASL. But it has long since been opened up to thousands of games. Each game has its own module that you download and add to your Vassal installation. Some publishers don't allow Vassal modules to be made of their products, and the Vassal community respects that. And in all cases, at least one of the two players playing via Vassal should have a copy of the game being played. Someone should own it. Don't be a turd. Oh, and Vassal is completely free. TTS. That stands for Tabletop Simulator. Similar to Vassal, TTS lets two or more people play a game over the internet, but only in real time. There's no asynchronous play available here. Its home is on Steam, where it's a paid program. It's not expensive, and then generally the game modules are free. Whereas Vassal tries to streamline play and automate things where it can, TTS tries very hard to exactly replicate the tabletop experience. You're looking at the game on a table with charts or cards laid out in front of you on that same table. You move the pieces like you would in real life. There's very little automation. I think it's particularly great for miniatures gamers. Here's a few more quick acronyms. MMP, Multi-Man Publishing, and they love acronyms, as this list will show. Here's a bunch of theirs. OCS is Operational Combat Series. That's a series of games from MMP that use the same basic rules. SCS, Standard Combat Series, an entry-level series of games from MMP that use the same basic rules. BCS, Battalion Combat Series, same sort of thing. TCS, Tactical Combat Series, another series from MMP that uses the same basic rules. And GCACW, that's Great Campaigns of the American Civil War. That's, again, a series of games set in the American Civil War that all use the same basic series rules. Then in terms of a few that are not specific to MMP, you might be confused about the difference between GCACW and this other one, GBACW. That's Great Battles of the American Civil War. This is also a series of games that use the same basic rules. It was originally started back in the early Strategy and Tactics magazine, but current games in the series are still being produced by GMT. It's a scale, sort of a level lower than the GCACW. Three more, CRT. That's a combat results table. That's one of the key features of war games from the very beginning. They've evolved a ton over time, but some version of them exists in probably 90% of all war games. TEC, Terrain Effects Chart. MP or MF, that's movement point or movement factor. How about this? IGOUGO, that's I go, you go. That's just a way of describing how turns work. I go, then you go, then I go, then you go. Sort of the most old school kind of game. It's the way chess works, really. Chit pull activation. That's a method of randomly determining which units get to move and fire each turn. This is in direct contrast to the I go, you go system of play. Asynchronous play. This generally refers to playing a game where turns are sent back and forth rather than playing in real time. Originally, asynchronously, turns were sent through the mail, the snail mail, and then email, and now log files are often swapped using Dropbox or Discord or similar. Anyway, that's a few that we can start our glossary with that. I'll try and get these posted up on the website. I encourage you to send in more. If you have more that you want looked up, we'll answer them. And if you have more that you think should be on the list, send those in too. I'll try to add them to the glossary online when I get it set up. Okay, next up, my interview with Will Bauer. This is for fans of the Levy and Campaign system or for folks looking to check that series out. Will skipped the first game, Nevsky, but then he fell hard for Almoravid and has since become quite involved with the Levy and Campaign Discord community and the playtest community. So here's our chat about Levy and Discord. I hope you enjoy it. All right, I am here with my good friend Will Bauer. Hey, Will, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, good to be here.
I think we first met online before we met in person, right? We became Vassal PBEM partners. Is that?
Yeah, I think it may have begun with deep dive into blind swords.
I think that was it. I think we started playing blind swords. Then I decided I was going to go down to the GMT West, and you decided you'd go there, and so we finally met each other in person.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I love that event.
Me too.
You get really up close, and you really get a sense of the culture of GMT Games, the culture of the team. It's great hearing Gene talk about what they're doing, and the scale is just perfect at 100 attendees or something. I mean, it's just wonderful, and they're wonderful players, and it's just a great.
I totally agree.
The tacos were great.
There's no tournaments per se. I mean, other than if somebody organized one. So there's no feeling of there's sharks circling in the water trying to look for weak opponents. Right? It's very friendly, and it's a great place to learn new games as well because it's just everything's so friendly there.
Yeah.
Are you going this fall?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And also to SD HistCon.
Yeah, I'll see you at SD HistCon. I'm looking forward to that. As they're both within 2 or 3 weekends of each other, I just couldn't swing going to both.
Yeah. Well, I live probably right between those two events in Huntington Beach.
Huntington Beach.
Yeah, so I'm not too far from San Diego and not too far. Hanford's a little further, but it's not too bad. So.
Right, but you're originally a Minnesotan.
Oh yeah, Minneapolis through and through. Yeah, my family's still there, and so.
When did you make the move down to
about
California?
7 years ago. About 7 years.
Oh, so you're still getting used to the sun and no snow.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I go back. I try to get my snow fix by visiting in the winter. Well, I visit throughout the year, but visiting in the winter to get a little bit of that too. So yeah.
Good man. As a Canadian, I heartily endorse needing a snow fix.
Yeah.
You're like most of us. We're of a similar age. You started gaming back in high school or junior high?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Like well, I'm trying to figure out. I must have been pretty young. At the very beginning was my brother, and we didn't do a lot together. But my brother brought home a copy of Tactics 2, and I don't even know where he got it, honestly. And it might have been late 60s. So I think it was just before I went into high school or freshman year or something like that. So, late 60s. And he kind of got the bug, which was odd because not necessarily something I would have pegged him for. And so he then got Africa Corps and Blitzkrieg and a couple of the other ones, and we spent time with those. And then there was kind of a gap. And then It came back when I began working in tech. And my first job coming out of school, there were gamers at work, and they were omnigamers. They did everything. They did war games, and they did, diplomacy and Dune and, Titan and all kinds of different stuff, and role playing and all kinds of stuff. And that brought it all back. And then from that point on, it was just a addiction.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you were working in tech, but the games that the group that you found were all into playing board games, that it wasn't a strictly video game thing.
Yeah, and honestly, the group there had not a lot of interest in video games. Doom, this is, again, pretty far back. Doom was a pretty big event when Doom came out because of the way the engine worked. There were technical reasons, but then also it just took the world by storm. First-person shooter, I think, and so forth. So, that was something everybody got into. But in general, not so much. And I don't know if there's a lot. You could do a whole podcast on, really, what is the allure of a physical board game versus playing, or even a physical board game played over Vassal.
Because we do a lot of that.
Yeah, compared to actual video gaming. And the edge is getting a little blurred as more and more of the behavior of the game is getting embodied in platforms like Rally the Troops, where the digital implementation is getting smarter and smarter all the time. Because Vassal, in general, very little, there's some automation, but it's just helping you do the rules. It's not enforcing the rules so much, So in any event, but yeah, that was the genesis of it. And then I remember specifically being on a family trip, and we went to Galena, Illinois, which is kind of a little historical town there. And they had a couple Avalon Hill games there, and I hadn't seen one in a long time. And I was like, I remember liking these, and I bought one, and then now my house is filled with them. So.
Galena, Illinois. Somehow, for some reason, that strikes a chord with me with U.S. Grant.
Yeah, in my birthplace or something.
It
was that or something. Yeah,
something. Yep. Well, so that's a fairly typical story. Somebody who plays when they're young, goes away from a while, and then gets back into it once their life settles down a little bit more.
Yeah, and then additionally, I more or less retired like maybe 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And it gave me a lot more time. And because in general, I play most of my PvEM, my distant games via Vassal, it gave me a chance to do really deep dives into some of the stuff that, places where I had interest, I could just spend the time to do the deep dive and really explore stuff that I really didn't have the time to look at. I had the time to buy them. I just didn't have the time to really play them. You know how it is. So yeah.
I'm still in the have the time to buy them phase.
Yeah, exactly.
But I agree about the playing Vassal via PvEM. There's no pressure on you to get your move done. If you really want to sort of sit and puzzle it out, that's kind of a sweet thing about it. I mean, I'm sure it's not a sweet thing for the people who suffer from analysis paralysis, but
I think it enables that actually, because you can, you've got 2 days to take your turn if you'd like to, But I did a lot of for a while. I did a lot of correspondence chess, and that has the same concept of it's turn based and it's asynchronous and so forth. And correspondence chess not necessarily involving actual correspondence, because there's tools for that too. And so finding ways to use, to have turn-based asynchronous play for all of these games that I've taken such a deep interest in was really a gift. I still have an item to get more well-versed in Tabletop Simulator, because I think it's the other major platform. Rally the Troops, there are a million platforms. It's, again, the thing, you could do a great show and just a survey of what all the platforms are and how they work. But, there are a lot of, the thing is there's critical mass in terms of modules in Vassal and TTS. They tend to, I think, have, in terms of historical conflict simulation, they both got critical mass in terms of lots and lots of modules and big catalogs. So.
Yeah, the thing with TTS is it doesn't do, I don't know if they even intend to do, but they don't do asynchronous play at all. There's no logs. There's no, you both got to be there. But where I think tabletop simulator must really shine is for the guys that are really into minis rules, but don't really have the desire to do the mini collecting and painting and do all that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's got to be just a giant boon for those guys.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also become a platform of choice for iterative play testing and development of war games and all kinds of Euros and all kinds of other games. But it's become, in some ways, it used to be. I mean, way back in the day, Cyberboard and Vassal both. More recently, more Vassal, but I think that a lot of the prototyping and iterative play testing is happening on TTS.
I think so too, because the nature of playtesting is you can't take the time to do asynchronous playtesting. Really, you need even if you're going to do it over the web, you need to do it in real time.
Yeah,
so that you can bang it out quick enough and move on to the next iteration.
Yeah.
So, well, what we're here to talk about today really is apart from our history of blind swords, which we've done a lot of, but we're going to talk a fair bit about the Levy and Campaign system, because we've both dived into that in a strange way. Out of the initial 3 games, we both played 2 of the 3. I've played Nevsky, skipped Almoravid, and we're playing Inferno, whereas you skipped Nevsky, went straight to the Taifa politics of Almoravid, and now Inferno. But you've also done a bunch of stuff with. You're very active on the Levy and Campaign Discord server, and you've been playtested. Like we've playtested a little bit of Henry together, not much on my end. You've done a bunch, and you're pretty up on everything that's going. So, in broad strokes, what's the appeal to you of the Levy and Campaign system?
Well, as we talked about trying to do this conversation, I thought that the idea might be like, what's the big idea? Take that. But, what's the big idea, right? And I think it might be an interesting way to look at the series and each of the titles is what's the big idea. So I started thinking about that. I mean, do a little exploration of that, perhaps. So if you think about what's going on here, if you set your focus to medieval conflicts, so that kind of sets from the fall of the Roman Empire to the fall of Constantinople, are considered like the bookends of medieval warfare. And if you look at that at the grand operational scale, so zooming way out, there are lots and lots and lots of medieval war games, conflict simulations that are focused on battles that are like way tight scope, right? All the way down to fairly tactical, sometimes grand tactical or strategic, but they're focused at that level. Not as many on medieval at that grand operational scale. And if you look at medieval conflicts at that scale, there are some characteristics that so the concept is that I think if I'm reading Volko's mind, it's like, Volko, what's the big idea? is he's looking at that space and he's looking at it from a historical point of view, gathering knowledge about how it really happened. And then he's looking at that, how would you really properly reflect that in a game dynamic? And there were a number of things that hadn't really been reflected at all or very well about medieval grand operational. And so there's a few unique characteristics about like medieval warfare at that scale. And so this is just looking at the topic, not looking at the game, at the simulation, right? Like one thing is there were no real standing national armies.
Right. So this whole thing of having vassal lords sign up for a bit and maybe keep on and maybe not. That's key to this whole series.
Yeah. And that's characteristic of that point in time. because later in history, it became more about nations than it was vassal lords and fiefdoms and so forth. And a lot of the dynamic began to change then. So you would see nations engage in conflicts over very long periods of time, where the nations were signed up to seeing the conflict to the end, whatever that meant.
Right.
And so here what you see is there are independent lords who raised armies and equipped the armies, and they would have to be convinced to join the conflict, for one thing, because they're looking out for themselves. And so
and convinced to stay.
Yeah, exactly. So, why should I? Well, you got to come up with something, right?
Cash. Loot.
Yeah, exactly. Or something, a role in a new government or whatever it is, So, and then additionally, the engagement of the Lord's army was not for an indefinite period of time. It was generally for a fairly limited period of time. And
like 40 days or?
Yeah, well, I think the way it worked is, from the history that I've gathered from the games themselves, and then where those take you in terms of further reading, is that it had kind of a seasonal structure. So it had to do with, in different climates, the seasons have different effects, but in general, it had kind of a seasonal heartbeat to it.
Right.
And in most of the Levy and Campaign games, they're really organized. The turn structure is really organized around what I would call a demi-season. So it's really 2 turns comprise a season. So they're about 40 days with a little period in between. And the period in between is not directly modeled, but you have like 2 40-day periods, which is about 3 months. So it's a season. And what you see is lords coming into the game with varying levels of commitment in terms of duration that they are willing to, from the outset, are willing to participate. And that will tend to be, 2, 4 demi-seasons, so 2 or 4 game turns in general. And then that tends to be somewhat driven by season, but also there are a couple of things that affect that stickiness of a participation of a lord. And so one is adversity. If they begin to suffer adversity, they shorten up that service commitment, right? And
also, if you mismanage them as their overlord, that'll shorten it up too if you're not on your toes.
Exactly. And then what extends that can be success and personal benefit from the outcome. So what you have is elastic participation in the conflict, and that's really different. That's not necessarily, well, we'll see later on in our conversation that these concepts are being extended to periods not strictly medieval, but it is a typical characteristic medieval conflict at this scale.
The only other game I can think of that that has a medieval setting is that has this kind of elasticity is, I think it's called Warriors of God. It's a 100 Years War game.
And MMP, I think. MMP.
And they have very random times. You roll at the end of every turn. You roll to see which of your leaders just die or go away. So the leadership there is very elastic as well. But it's way more random and less nuanced than we see here in the Levy and Campaign series.
Right. And in Levy and Campaign, you do have tools to manage encouraging lords to continue their commitment to the conflict. You have ways of thinking that through, right? So that it's an odd thing because in these games, I'm not sure whose chair the player is sitting in. You're kind of sitting in that side's God chair because you're not. It's not like you're commander European theater of operations or something. You're kind of overseeing a bunch of lords on one side, but you can engineer their ongoing participation. In some cases, there are ways to do that. So
looting and feeding and all that
exactly.
sort of thing.
And cash and loot. They're tools. They're tools. Additionally, in this era, logistics played a key role in terms of
that's like that. It's like Volko looked at the medieval operational warfare and went, well, we can't just have a bunch of trucks, to solve our supply problems, right? And in the first game, there's sleds, there's boats, there's carts,
Yeah.
There's probably ice, like he really goes the 9 yards in nailing you down and figuring out logistics in
Yes.
this series.
Yeah, and it's a few. So in medieval warfare, the subject being considered, that logistics had played a key role in range of operations, like how far you could get and do anything effective, force projection, and duration of involvement. So it affected, not just combat capability, but also, again, if you don't feed your troops, they'll just go back home. They'll just disband. And so there's an interesting dynamic in the subject matter around logistics that caused, I think, the design teams that have worked on these games over time, and Volko being the showrunner, that they needed to really deal with supply in a different way than it had been done in other conflict simulations. There's also, in this era, there's a fairly broad range of unit types and arms types. There's a really broad range of knights and light horse, and there's a fairly diverse set of capabilities there in the kinetic side, and a range of leadership abilities. Yeah, go.
In terms of the differences in units, I find the variety that are offered to us is robust enough so that there's usually at least 4 to 6 or 8 different types of units on a side, without it being overwhelming about pikes versus halberds versus the kind of. It's just one level up from what musket and pike games at the more tactical level are.
Right.
But still, there's a diversity.
And that's an interesting point that we can dig a little bit deeper into, though. But these series of games have what I call, or what some people call, telescoping level, from grand operations all the way down to a somewhat abstracted but tactical combat resolution, conflict resolution. So what you have is the game focuses. I mean, most of the energy in the game is spent at the grand operation level, but the game telescopes down into strategic and tactical. And at the tactical level, you see the unit variety. You see units equipped with a variety of capabilities in terms of armaments and so forth. You see them behaving differently. Their defensive capabilities are different. So it's crazy that it worked to have it be working at this telescoping level.
It's like it's telescope down to basically a battle board. And you have the different units on that battle board, but also depending on which lords are involved, they may have cards that give them some of those units special capabilities above and beyond what the normal capability is as well. Like knights might have special armor, or they might, I don't know, you might have some crossbowmen or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So it's you go from a very, very high level view where, in general, maps are portions of continents. Honestly, most of the maps are portions of continents. They're at a pretty large scale, right? You'll have the entire southern part of Spain in Almora.
It's like a big chunk of what we think of as a country now. It's not the whole country, but it's large.
Yeah, it's a pretty big. They're a big amount of space. Yeah. And you have
on a small map, though. I should point out that when I first opened my first box of Levy and Campaign, I was delighted to see how compact the map was, because you actually need a lot more table space to put out the mats for the lords or the cards and everything like that. So if you're a veteran wargamer and you're used to 24 by 36 maps, or sometimes 2 of those for your wargaming, these maps are not that.
Right.
They show a big amount of country, but in a nice compact display.
Right, exactly. And it's all point-to-point movement. So you have, again, a higher level of abstraction where most of the energy is spent in the game. And, it put, my first time I played Almora, it put me in mind of the U.S. Civil War from GMT in terms of big map, and these little concentrations of forces, like, mostly white space around everybody. And you're like, how do I handle force projection in this? It's a little bit different, and, both games are grand operational in nature and so forth. Another aspect of medieval warfare that I think played a role in shaping the way the games work is that full-on large-scale field battles were really more rare than people think, because most of the attention is given to simulating battles at the battle level. But in essence, the campaigns that happened in this era, there was a lot of avoiding full-on field battles,
Right.
And so it's a rarer occurrence in these games.
Avoiding the battle, but also if you can get to the strategic town or stronghold before the other guy, that's in some ways more important than defeating him in battle. It's like getting to the place that you need to be.
Yeah, exactly. And because, and again, at some point we could kind of dig into the way the combat resolution works, but there are very few well, again, it depends on which game in the series you play and so forth, but they're always frightening. So,
the battles?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little frightening. So
they can go sideways really fast, even if you have the advantage in force.
Yeah. And the downside, the risk opportunity tends to be, there's a lot more risk than opportunity in most field battles in most of these games. So it's a tricky thing. I mean, even sieges, full-on stronghold sieges, are kind of counterindicated in some of the games, because in the era being modeled, those were difficult to succeed at. So you have these attributes of the period being modeled that then called for innovations there are some innovations in the game system. There's some things that we've seen before that are being reapplied, but there are some innovations. And so those innovations are what began to give this series, and the clever, I guess genius of being able to design a solution to this problem for, let's say, one theater, Nevsky, but do it in a way that what you really have is an engine that can be used to model a broad range of conflicts in this period. I mean, that's the smart thing. The franchise, the franchise concept of that.
Well, here's my question for you. I know Volkel was really one of the things that he grabbed from another game was the command deck thing. He got that from Angola, where you take a deck of cards and you have to say there's 8 of them or 6 of them. You order them in the order your leaders are going to get to go, and then no matter what happens, you're locked into that. And so that he stuck that right into this game, which is great fun, which makes you pull your hair out at times. Yeah. But here's my question. I wonder if Volkel was originally just he was interested in Nevsky. He was interested in that battle on the ice, that whole thing. He came up with this game. I wonder if he realized at the time that he was creating another system like he'd done with Coin.
I think we could ask him in
I'm sure we could, but I don't know if I just wondered if you'd ever.
I think an answer to that. Okay, so I'll lay out my prediction, and then in November we can actually maybe ask him. But I think it might have been. It feels to me like what happened was he's looking at medieval conflict at, in general, this grand operational scale, and he's seeing these conditions: the lordship-raised armies with variable service commitments and so forth, and the importance of supply in a very different kind of a way than what we've seen in later conflicts. And then I think these are stirring around, and then he says, well, where should I take this idea to get a concrete example to model?
Mm.
And Nevsky becomes, and the thing about the series is they're almost every one of these games, and looking deep into the pipeline, they are undergamed conflicts that even gamers and many historians are not particularly familiar with many of these conflicts, right? It's one of the cool things is that it's a tool that can be used to model Gauss and Ghibellines in Italy, which is not, I mean, I don't know how many games, there may be two about that topic, you know, and even the Almoravid
that had to be one of the
period,
big, that had to be a big thing that excited Volko about the whole series, because I think he's pretty interested in gaming undergamed topics.
Yes, right. So, and you know, things that fall outside of what you would call the mainstream, you know. So, the same with coin, right? A new kind of conflict. So, you know, my thinking, because again, he's got so much deep experience as what I would call the showrunner of coin, right? You know, the guy that keeps those titles maybe on the rails as far as them really representing the intent of the system. I think he's been able to learn from that how the engine responds to reapplication across titles. And so it wouldn't surprise me if some of the thinking early was these pieces can be used for many, many conflicts that are in this period and have this characteristic. And then you vary it by, you add the pieces that are specific to that particular problem. So in Almoravid, the Taifa politics, for instance, is the key differentiator of that one. You know, there's going to be this 1 to 5 key changes that are made with every title that lock it into that specific conflict and not feel like a generic, you know, just as we're using the engine and here's the engine again, right? A specific flavor. So I think, I don't know, I think it might be kind of a hybrid, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a general characteristic of medieval warfare at this scale. These are the things you'd have to have. Now I've got a toolkit. We'll do an embodiment. We'll see if that embodiment has any traction, and we'll go from there. I don't.
So you think he came up with the idea of a medieval game, and then went, okay, Nevsky will work
the principles. Yeah, the principles.
Yeah,
I think maybe, you know.
I think I mean, we all know that you know, there's seemingly an endless supply of Levy and Campaign games in the system. I think that was a flowering of two, or a combination of two things. One, I think Volko's the kind of guy who's very interested in getting in mentoring new designers.
Right.
So that's the one thing. And then I think Discord was the other thing. When they set up the Levy and Campaign Discord server, anybody who had an idea could come and talk about it. Right. With the grand poobah of the system, and you know, not everything that gets discussed on that system is going to get into the pipeline, but I was over there the other day, and I saw Volko say that kind of the general goal is to get to 2 LNC games out a year. Yeah, and I just thought, holy smokes, that is like we only used to get 3 games total out of Avalon Hill in a year back in the day, right? Yeah. So,
but you know, the thing is, you know, I think I did a look into the pipeline. Yeah, and so you've got right now you've got 4 shipped, right? So you've got Nevsky, Almoravid, Inferno, and Plantagenet, right? So you've got 4 titles shipped. Seljuk is the next one. It's an art. It hasn't shipped yet, but that's the next one that's committed to being shipped. Yep. And then in P500, there are 2. There are Henry, which is the simplified, slimmed down, accessible Levy and Campaign title. And then Ziska, which is in the P500. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, then you've got 22 proposals in the Discord channel. Yeah, so at 2 a year, that's over a decade of releases. At 2 a year,
that's also interesting too, though, because with 22, you know, they've got an embarrassment of riches to choose the really quality ones to go next, right? Yeah. It's like the good ones are going to rise to the top, and the ones that don't pan out, we're never going to see. There's too much competition.
Yeah, and the thing that I've been impressed with as I watch them, the conversations around these games is in general, the designer who first proposes a particular conflict, the level of deep historical understanding is just impressive. I mean, it's shocking. I mean, Almoravid had the historical playbook, the background book, I guess it's called, 65 pages. Now, part of that is in-depth explanation of each of the capabilities and events, but I think it's 40 pages, 45 pages of history in a historical setting. And when you see the conversation with the designers of the backlog, they're deep. The designers are deep into the history of the conflicts and have a personal affinity for the topic. So they've got a passion. It's a passion project for them also. So,
well, on the one hand, yeah, I find wargame designers and developers are also deep history nerds as well. Yeah. But it's one thing to be a deep history nerd of the Battle of the Bulge, and another thing to be a deep history nerd of Gelfs and Ghibellines, right?
Yes,
it's like,
yes, absolutely.
So it's a whole just different level of commitment to really obscure topics.
Yes, yeah, and again, for the player, that is part of the excitement about the series is we're not likely to see a Levy and Campaign game on Stalingrad. It's not in general not probably going to happen.
Yeah.
And or Manassas.
No, I think the Plantagenet is probably that's as close to a big topic as we're going to see in a way. The Wars of the Roses, right? It's like that's about as kind of popular a topic as we may see in this series.
Yeah, exactly. That one did feel, and Henry, it's English forays on French or English on the continent, depending on how you want to look at the
well, let's take a little sidebar here and talk about Henry, because I have a couple of I wonder, you've played it more than me, but there's been lots of description of that game as being it might be the entry level Levy and Campaign game, but I'm not sure if that's the case. It's certainly smaller, and that's cool.
Yeah.
But the fact that the English player basically does one levy at the start of the game and takes everything with him over to France, and he never really does another levy for the whole rest of the game.
Yeah.
There's something about that doesn't feel representative of the LNC series to me.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, can you hear the air show?
I can. You've got some jets going by.
There's a big air show on Huntington Beach this weekend, and the fighters are practicing all week, and we live like 2 blocks from the beach here, and
it's still totally easy to hear what you're saying. So it's
the other thing too is it's setting off all the car alarms. So every car on the street over here is like
we're not hearing.
So
that.
The thing about Henry is what makes it difficult is I think it's a good idea I think these games are a heavy lift. Not everyone agrees with that, and we can kind of dig into what makes them a heavy lift, but I think they're a pretty heavy lift. And I think even Cole Worley called them a man-sized meal or a full meal. A full meal, I think he said. He said it was a full meal to try to learn those. And that will deter some people from entering, the process of exploring the titles. So I think it's a good idea. Then the problem becomes, how do you tease out enough that it expresses what the game is trying to convey and shields the player or filters out the complexities that cause these games to be a fairly heavy lift. And that's a really difficult design problem. I was just thinking about this today when I saw that Ananda Gupta is going to be at the SDHiscon.
Oh, great.
And I remember when Imperial Struggle came out, it was, eagerly anticipated, instant back for me on P500 and so forth.
Yeah, me too.
When I first got the game, it was just like, okay, there's a lot happening here, right? And a lot of it's kind of, it felt like there was a fair amount of dirt, like a complicated, interactive edge case kind of problems, right? And all I could think of is I just wish it had been a more accessible game. And then once I learned to play it, I can't think of anything I'd pull out of it that wouldn't make it a less successful design. And so, the first couple of games were rocky for me, but once I got it understood and got it to the point where I could now begin manipulating the machine to try to get to a victory somehow, or at least not embarrass myself with my loss, I began to realize that there's almost nothing you could leave out without changing the fabric of the game. And so you have that difficulty with Henry too.
I totally agree with you about Imperial Struggle. There's so much going on, and it's all interconnected, so that any move you make has ripple effects in 3 or 4 different directions.
Yes.
Whatever, and that was the big struggle in trying to get a handle on that game. But once I did get a handle on that game, I realized that's probably the point of the design.
Yes,
is the interconnectedness.
Yeah,
and if you do anything to diminish that, you're dumbing down the point of the game.
Yeah. And now I think I've played 40 something games of IS, and it's been in my own kind of sense of top 10 for a long time now, well, since release, because once I got through that learning process. So, but that's good input into what the learning process was like for the LNC series.
I think in some ways I'm feeling like Inferno is not a bad place to start your LNC journey. The transportation, you don't have sleds and boats and carts, and you don't have the million different things.
No mules.
You don't have all that
have to be fed. Yeah.
You don't have the politics layer that's in Inferno. And then the other thing is, Almoravid. And then the other thing Inferno has is, I felt there's a greater sort of wide openness in terms of where you go and what you do.
Yeah.
In Henry, you're very limited in what you can do, and I suppose that's in some ways good, but I don't know how much replayability there will be with Henry, because there's you start at one end or the other as Henry, and try and make your way up or down the map is kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with you that Inferno is like a pretty good starting point, because I came in in Act 2. Almoravid. I came in Act 2, and I'm like, this play isn't making any sense. Like, what's going on here?
And this, we all know from music that the second album is always the difficult second album.
Yeah, well, there's that too. And the dynamic, one of the dynamics in Almoravid that makes it, I would not, I dived into, there were only Almoravid and Nevsky when I jumped in. Nevsky, the theme didn't appeal to me. The setting didn't appeal to me, and the cover art was a little off-putting, I think. And so I waited.
Cover art. They had great cover art before they switched the cover art before publication.
Oh, I didn't.
They had a great cover before that. It was,
and to each and so forth, and not denigrating anybody's work, but it just wasn't. It didn't draw me in, and I didn't know anything really about it. And you have to sometimes wait. You can't go after everything all the time. The hobby is too big, and the publishers are publishing too much stuff for that. So I just, skipped it. And Almoravid, the reason Almoravid caught my interest was obviously the Levy and Campaign series was gaining traction, and it was interesting, but I have an affinity for that subject matter. So, I had studied some of that history in school, some of it taught in Spanish, right? So I had a Spanish instructor who just loved talking about the Moors and the Moorish influence in Spain. And, I visited Granada a number of times. And so, it's just one of these things where that era was attractive, and there aren't very many good games about it.
Right. So it grabbed you.
So I was like, okay, you got me. And, I get the thing, and wow, okay, now my brain's hurting. And, I as I told you one time, my journey through these titles has been almost, it's been 100% Vassal asynchronous play. with an opponent. I don't play these kind of games solo at all. I don't tend to play coin games solo. It's just not what I do. That's great for people, but it's not something that works for me. I had a great opponent for Almoravid, who was a person who had done some play testing and had played Nevsky some, not an expert by any means. Very patient with every mistake I made, right?
Those are the
And
best.
it was at one point I had to stop and write a paper to myself, write a letter to myself, trying to explain to myself why I was struggling so much to learn this game. It was that difficult for me. And, I've played many very complex, like, again, if you start talking about what you consider a complex game, you're always going to have someone say, that's not complex. And, well, okay, it was for me,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah, totally. I mean,
so
it must have meant something really special. It must have grabbed you in some really deep way for you to feel like you had to write that letter to yourself. Like if you were really struggling and yet you were saying, I got to keep going. Like that's a pretty big, that's a pull. Yeah. Why is that?
Well, either that or it's a sickness. I'm not really sure between those two, but I think there was a really good, review of Inferno on Board Game Geek lately, and it was something about Inferno, warfare in Italy where everything sucks or something like that. It was on Board Game Geek. It was a great review, though. And it talked about this idea of a type A challenge. And I think in the review, he talks about it from the standpoint of an avid bicyclist and encountering hills and so forth. And you go, one person would go, that was horrific. I don't want to ever do that again. And another person will go when they get to the top, they go, yeah, that was horrific. And look, now I'm on the other side of that challenge and that feels good. And so I think it was engaging with challenge for one thing. And I think also it was engaging with theme. Again, the content of what was being modeled was something that I had an affinity for. And so it was the idea of I can keep kind of hacking my way into this, like really working my way through it. And the one thing is that with each scenario and with each game, some piece clicked. So I could at least have one part I could check. Okay, I understand how to move a unit from one locale to another. Check. Okay, like major accomplishment.
When I was first playing Nevsky, I had multiple times where I did not plan properly and I ran out of provender, or I screwed something up and I shortened my a lord's loyalty time to me and lost them. Like I made those mistakes over and over. Even when I thought I'd learned from my mistakes, I would still make the mistakes again.
Yeah. Well, I think those are easier to make in Nevsky because the supply model there is more complex. The transport and supply model there is more complex.
It is. You have all those seasons to do.
Yeah, and those impact, like, you always have the wrong stuff,
Yeah, that's that's
how I felt. Snow tires in the summer, snow tires in the summer, Yeah.
I never had my skates when I needed them.
Yeah, exactly. So, it is that one has that built in a little bit more. I think the thing that the problem was that I was trying to learn the game the way I learned other games, because that's the way I learn games. And that actually didn't work very well. And so when I pick up a new traditional conflict simulation, I'll kind of read through the rules quickly to understand the arc of play. And then the idea is get a game going. And then I'll figure out movement. I'll turn to the movement section and it'll say, this is how you move. And then I'll turn to the supply to make sure I didn't get myself out of supply or whatever. And combat. And in general, there are people that can read combat rules and understand without having to experience it what the lethality is. I don't do it that way. The way I do it is I play the game and I get some conflicts going, and then you begin to realize what the lethality of the system, how lethal combat is. Are units bouncing off each other a lot, or are they just disappearing from play? This kind of thing, right? And there were a number of things with learning Almoravid that didn't work that way. And one is that, for instance, in Levy and Campaign, you don't have a section of the rule book that's called supply that tells you how the supply system works. What you have is you have how do you even how you garner supply, how you acquire supply is broken up over a number of actions. So you have the supply action, the ravage action, and the forage action. And there are other ones like, stealing from guys after you've beaten them up and so forth. There's a number of ways to get it, but that's not in one place. Those are kind of all over the place.
Yeah, or they're all in a section called like the section action. On what you can do, actions or commands or whatever, right?
And so then
they're not focused on the end result. They're focused on the wide open possibilities of what you might do.
Yes, exactly. And the games are pretty sandboxy. And so, you have like acquiring is like supply is not like, here's how supply works. It's like how to acquire is broken up over a bunch of places. How to move your supplies and the impact of supply on your ability to move is now in a couple different places. And the impact of running out of supply is not normally what you have in a traditional war game. You should have a section called out of supply units. And it would say, this is how they work, and you're like, it doesn't work that way. So being able to connect the dots on how these things happen, I really couldn't rely on that thing of being able to see it structurally before I played. It was really, I just had to do everything wrong over and over, like the kind of the experience you're describing,
I think I did everything wrong over and over, similar to you, but I learned games slightly. I didn't have the same frustration with the rule book as you did, but I did have the same frustrations in learning as you. I'm like you, when I get a game, I skim through the rule book to kind of get a feeling for it. Then I punch the counters or whatever, set it up. And then, but rather than looking at the movement rules and then the combat or supply, what I always do is I look at the sequence of, I look at the victory conditions to see what we're going to do. And then I look at the sequence of play and just chunk my way through it. And the thing with this game, so I wasn't looking for like the supply rules, but when I would get to the section of, okay, now you've levied, we've done all that. Now we're campaigning, and you've got your first guy ready to go. And there's this big section in the rules of all the things he can do. Well, it was like, okay, that's all the things he can do, but what the hell do I do?
Yeah,
the sandboxiness of it left me a little bewildered as to what to do next quite often.
Yes. Well, and the other thing the other learning process for me had to do with, it is not what you're trying to do in Almoravid in particular, because that was my learning game. It's really asymmetrical in a way that, like, when you open a coin game, it's really apparent the asymmetry. You're guided to the asymmetry because you get victory points for doing this thing, and it's like pretty clear. I'm the warlords. I'm trying to produce poppies and sell opium, and that's the way I succeed. Okay, got it, right? Or I'm trying to build support, or I'm trying to build control, or whatever it is.
There's four different. In coin games, there's four completely separate sets of victory conditions.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. And here, the problem is that the sides are asymmetric. Everybody's just trying to get victory points. You get them in different ways. Got it. But because of the capabilities and the structure of the sides. Like, one thing you cannot do as the Muslim side in Almoravid is you can't try to meet the Christians on their own ground. You will fail. And so if you try to engage them in combat or try to take back what they've just taken and they can just come back and stomp you again, you have to somehow understand, and it's really a beautiful aspect of the game once you have it figured out, is you have to think completely differently to play the Muslim side than the Christian side. Right. And the experience of playing the Muslim side is the Christians have everything better, everything. They have better command. They have marshals right away. They have knights. They have capabilities and events that are killers. They have proximity to really key locations. Yeah.
Is that just for the first half of the game, and then the Muslims come on, like get something? Like, does the game feel balanced to you, or does it feel like the Muslims take a kicking from beginning to end?
Well, I'll tell you that so what I did, and again, I think it's this type A punishment as reward that I do, but I have only played the Muslims, but I've played now maybe 12 games of various scenarios. And the idea was, the first game I failed miserably, and I was like, I can do better. I know I can do better. And then with each game, I was like, I can't believe I'm still losing, but I'll do better. I'll do better. And I got to figure out how to do this. And I like playing, in general, I like playing underdog sides in most games because, I don't know, it's just a challenge there. The kind of getting back to it from a balance point of view, it has to do somewhat with long versus short scenarios, because the nature of the game changes when you have a longer scenario or the campaign game, because you're now planning over a longer arc. And so you can carefully build up the proper capabilities, the right number of transport, the right amount of supply to do the thing you're trying to do. You can assemble lords. I saw a pretty cool trick talked about for Inferno, where a side, I think it was against a player maxed out on lords, okay, which is usually kind of a problem because they can't all act because of the command card system, but maxed out on lords, and then carefully maxed out on capabilities to the lords. And what that did is that reduced the event deck to like only a couple cards, and they were good ones, like surprise. So what happened was they deck managed the event deck down. And so, there are things you can do that are really clever, right? I mean, that's a really clever idea. And so pardon me. In Almoravid, I think my experience was, well, playing the Muslims just sucks all the time. It's just awful. Like, you don't have anything as good as they do. And they'll just prove it to you. Yeah, try something. Okay, I will. Yeah, boom, you've been stomped. Okay, over and over.
Well, there's been some talk about that game having balance issues. Like there's been some, and when I hear that, I'm always like, just like play it more.
Yes, yeah.
I find a lot of times players are quick to judge the balance of a game, but I mean, you've played 12 times, and you're you're a pretty active participant in their Discord community. So what's the current thinking about Almoravid?
Well, so what happened is game got released, and honestly, I'm of a mixed mind about issues post-release with games. A lot of gamers are frustrated by it. Like, I paid XYZ money, whatever it is, which really only what we pay for games generally guarantees a starving for designers, not a living, a starving.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They're not making any money, but in general. But I think that there are things that can only be learned once some games get released to general population, and especially if they're complicated. So there are things you're not going to see. No amount of playtesting will get you what happens in the first 6 months of the general release. And the rebalancing that happened in general happened with the smaller scenarios. So, but those are the ones that most people start with.
Right.
But what's really good about the rebalancing is that none of it required any republication of physical components. So it was all about adding balancing VPs to the Muslim side, or coins on Lord's mats that would let them extend their service levels.
So you can just go to BGG and get, or GMT's website, and download a PDF of these
scenario
balancing issues.
Just scenario changes that didn't require any component change in general.
Fantastic.
And that's pretty good, right?
That's amazing.
But the play experience that's interesting about that is, so now they did adjust the play balance on this, so I get a couple extra VP to start, then I get some coins. Everything I do still sucks. I just don't lose as bad for doing it. You know what I'm saying, right? Like
right.
you know, so I can't do anything.
It might not be that right. It might not be that fun to play the Muslims in that game.
Well, I mean, it's still everything sucks, but I got some coins so I can extend my service because I just got stomped on, and so, or I got a few extra. Giving one side a lot of extra VPs. I mean, that's an easy way to balance a scenario, but it doesn't necessarily change the play dynamic. That just puts the VP range a little tighter and can put a little more onus on the favored side.
Have you thought of going to one of your favorite opponents who spanks you and saying, "Look, just this one time, you play the Muslims, and let me see, if you can, see if it's all on me," or
yeah, well,
or,
yeah, I'm almost a little afraid too because it might reveal it might reveal it was me.
I hear you.
And the thing is, if you pay attention to the Discord channel, like apparently I missed most of it, but the big tournament was the final was won by the Muslim player. So there is some sense that it's not an unwinnable side, but that has a lot to do with managing the arrival of the African forces, which are enormous. I mean, they're huge forces. But the problem with that is that you don't get there until you've played a few of if you play the scenarios in order to try to build up your abilities, you don't really get to that kind of thing until you've played quite a few scenarios, especially if you want to play them a couple times to figure out what's going on with them. And managing the Almoravids is its own kind of problem because they come with a ton of troops that are difficult to feed. They come in at the southernmost point of the map where most of the action is going to be in the center or above. So you have to move them a lot, which requires them to need a lot of food. You have to engineer it. You have to really carefully create the situation that'll make their impact worth having brought them on the map. And, that has contrast again to the Christian side where they can they begin by being with a marshal, being able to get a number of lords in one place and get a really high punch factor going. And so, so in terms of play balance, I'm still losing as the Muslims. So, I'm still doing it. I'm still losing.
But you told me offline that as frustrated as you got with this game, you've got to the point where you're really loving it.
Oh yeah, it might be a sickness, but what started to happen is the light bulb went on. First, when you start playing the extended game, you begin to see this longer arc, and that longer arc might be the heart of the thing is they're very long games. So, the full campaign is a fairly long game unless you lose quickly, and I've done that a couple times. But there is something, as I've sort of learned what to expect from all of it. Most of what's going on in Almoravid now, I have a pretty good grasp on. There are some times where I don't, you'd like to develop a stronger intuitive sense of if I lose this lord and this taifa goes from being independent to being pariah or Reconquista, exactly what's the VP swing and what does that mean strategically, right? Be able to really anticipate that without having to stop and really go through it, right? Just have a feel for that. And some of that I still don't have a very good intuitive sense of at this point, but I'm getting there. And there's something as I play it more and it becomes a little bit easier to lose. I understand the mechanics a little bit better and I feel like I'm getting it. There's something really, really different about the way it plays. And it's not just the success in view of a challenge, I don't struggle as much as I did, There's something about how it plays and what it's doing that's really fascinating. And it did, as I went from there to Inferno, it was oh man, this is recreational compared to what I was doing because Inferno is the type of politics is removed and the complexity of transport is removed and this it's in some ways simplified, but now you have treachery and revolt and you have communes and languishing knights and there's a few things that got added, but actually pretty easy to get a handle on. They're not too bad.
Yeah,
It is wide open, but it doesn't feel, at least now, only a few games in. I'm a few games in on Inferno. It doesn't feel as asymmetrical, and that might be
right.
why it's an easier one to learn. Actually,
Yeah,
the sides feel
I've
kind of similar.
yeah, that's what I've been picking up on in my own play, and what I've been hearing too and that I totally agree that might be what also makes it a good entry point into the system, because of the sides are more similar than in the
Right.
previous two.
And I suspect that as I get deeper into that title, the asymmetry will probably emerge mostly from the troop differentiation and capability differentiation of some of the events. So I think that what will happen is I'll begin to realize that all lords are not equal, that there's some lords that have stronger capability in this or that arena. And by highlighting my assets, like in any good war game, conflict simulation, is think about what's unique to my side, what's my capability that I should lean into, and what I should be careful about being my weakness. The sides may wind up being better, more differentiated. But again, I'm not there yet.
Probably right. And also, there's a big differentiation. The map is the map, and one side starts in certain spots, has seats in certain spots, and one side in different spots, and that makes for a tremendous amount of asynchronicity right off the bat.
Yeah, the geography is different and so forth, and the scenario setups also will have already some castles, some locale strongholds ruined, and so there's things in the setup that give you a little bit different. Like my job is now to do this because the scenario begins in a little bit different state. So it's that kind of thing. But I did want to, before we got too far off the learning process from Almoravid, is in going through that, writing the letter to myself, what the problems were. There really are. I believe that there really are difficulties in the way the information is communicated and how it's presented. So the rule book, the playbook, there's a couple issues, and graphic presentation. I had to stop and think, why am I struggling to even read these rules? Like, why is it a tough read? Why is it that I'm doing something in the game in Vassal because I got 4 hours if I want it to read the rules, because the guy's looking for a log tomorrow, and I'll just go through and read it and go, like, literally what, like what? And what happened was then I started looking at it structurally, like from a communication standpoint, and there were, I don't know, I got a little list that I made up here at one point. I got like maybe 10, 15 structural issues, not, people, you start raising this issue in either Board Game Geek or on Discord, and, you'll hear all kinds of, the first thing is, oh, it's a GMT game. You're not used to a GMT game rule book. Well, I don't know. I've played Use, I've played Cataclysm, I've played Here I Stand, I don't know, Coin, half or 3/4 of the Coin series. I've played a lot of GMT games.
Yeah.
Or, you have to have learned Nevsky first. And then I'm like, well, I get it, but every title should be able to stand on its own, unless it's an expansion, a true expansion. Yeah. And what I'm seeing now is that many of the structural points that I raised when I was trying to encounter the rules, and you eventually get through it. Eventually you figure out the rule, and now it's internalized. And now there are days when I'm playing Almoravid where I just pray I don't hit something I don't know yet, so I don't have to go back to that rule book and try to go through it, because it's difficult. It's really a difficult presentation, I think. But what I'm seeing now is that as more and more people play it, I'm just seeing posts where people who are experienced wargamers will go, I had this problem with the rule book or that problem with the rule book, and I'll look at my list and I'll go, yeah, that's number 4, number 6. It's not. And I even did see on Discord the other day where it might be the guy working on the Ancients title, because Levy and Campaign now is branching out of strictly medieval.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I found difficult is, there's a lot of ways to do everything. But one thing that I found really difficult was when I'm trying to figure out the things I can do, I look through the actions rules in the campaign section. So I can do supply, I can do ravage, I can do whatever, right? And what happens is, I think one of the very first ones is march, which is how you move units around. And the march section is not very big because you march from one locale to another and you have to worry about being laden or unladen. And when you get there, if it's an enemy place, you have to bypass a siege. That's kind of it, right? It's not long, but it's right there that they introduce all of the battle stuff. Like everything about battles is right there, and all about storms and everything else, right? So you're interrupted if you're trying to kind of get an idea what all your actions are. You go, okay, march, got it. Right, what's the next thing? Oh, page, battle, forage. Okay. And a more recent title designer just posted that he moved the battle stuff out, and he's got in move. Like if you wind up in a situation where you cause a battle to happen, go to the battle thing and figure it out,
right.
Which is, again, more consistent with traditional war game rules where combat is separated from being, it's not right in the middle of march, move. I understand it being there because move triggers battle. But the problem is that from a cognitive load point of view, it's a really difficult place to put it. Because if you're trying to, again, get a sense of what the menu is of my actions and how they each work, I don't want it there. I want to be able to go, and especially because this rule set has a lot of kind of go-to structure where you'll get part of a rule and then it'll say, and go here to figure out the rest of it, and then go there to figure out the rest of it. It seems like battle, a huge chunk, could have been something where you just say, and in this case, field battle occurs, go to the battle thing and figure that out. So I'm seeing more feedback than a lot of this 10, 15 points of why it didn't communicate well. It wasn't just me stumbling on those things. And I think that if you had come in through Nevsky, that might have been the same. I only briefly looked at the rulebook for Nevsky, but it might have been the same structural problems. But if you did Nevsky, you had a lot easier time understanding the rulebook for Almoravid. You just,
right. You've got the bones of the system.
You get it, and you're just looking for, okay, it's high for politics.
I think the Nevsky rulebook is probably similar. The other thing I find with those rulebooks, which is not common to all GMT rulebooks, is the rules presentation is quite text dense. There's not much white space on each page.
Yeah.
Like even the line spacing feels tight. It's like
well, there are actually I think there are. Well, I mean, I don't want to. Again, Charles Roberts Award winner.
Yeah, no, it's great stuff.
These are groundbreaking games, and they are achievements. They are, but there are language and layout problems with the rule books, and those two things create the problem. So it's not just that there are what I consider to be language issues, but what you're talking about layout, the amount of space. And I don't know if they were afraid of the rule book exceeding a certain page count, or there might be a commercial.
That's all I can think.
Yeah,
it's just the eye. Subconsciously, your eye wants to rest a little bit. That's that, and that space is helpful.
Yeah, that
also
and
lets you anchor too.
Yes,
it lets
exactly.
you when you lift your eye, you get right back. If there's more white space, you can anchor.
Well, that's structural. There's a structural problem with the ability to find the context of the thing that you're trying to find, because of the density of sections will be extremely dense. But the other thing is what I found, it's one of these points, but is when I'm reading a rule, and the first thing I see is a broad triangle in front of it, which is an Almoravid artifact. I don't know if Inferno has these or not, but that was indicating that that's a rule that's different from Nevsky. But I never played Nevsky, so I'm just reading the rule and I'm going, it took me a lot to figure out broad triangle, ignore, right? Just ignore, because it doesn't mean anything to me. The very first thing in reading the rule is ignore that, and then as you read the rule, you'll get 3 or 4 words and then a string of references to other rules, and then you'll get 3 or 4 words and a string of references, 4.3.4, 4.2.1, whatever. And when you're reading the rule, I figure those references are there because I need to know about them at that moment. It's telling me something important. And often you chase them, and all it is a Lord's counter is a cylinder.
Yeah, a definition of something.
Yeah, pointing back to the most basic thing that is not even useful at that moment. Like really, is those? Like I've looked now at like Blind Swords because most war game rules do have reference like that, right? But they only have them if they're adding value to the thing you're trying to read at the moment, right? Like here's the detail on that or something. And there's even an example here. What was the one? There was a really weird one where it was, sorry, but there was one where it's like you're going through battle resolution and it was like losses or something. So you come to it, and there's the bullet for losses, and it says, do the loss procedure below. You're like, okay, that was like half a sentence. Okay. So now there's a paragraph of something else, and now there's the loss procedure. You're like, well, why did you just put it up there? Because it's not like it gets reused in some other way. Like it's not being pointed to in 5 different ways. It just get it up there. Like, why did we do a skip for that, right? And I'm not sure if it was loss procedure or something, but it was something like that. We're just like, we didn't need that. So
right.
There was a thing about being able to scan the language and pick up on it. And what I consider to be fairly excessive use of these pointers back to rules that aren't providing any value in the context of what you're in, like every time a victory point thing is mentioned, which is pretty, it's a pretty straightforward thing. Move the victory point marker. There's a thing that says back to the thing of where it defines what a victory point marker is. And, it's like, it just seems, it makes it hard to stand.
Do you ever consider then in ignoring those unless you're still confused and then using the references?
Well, that's the thing you have to train yourself to do.
Yeah,
so what you have to train yourself to do is, first of all, assume that none of them matter. Like go from that assumption that all of these things that have been added to the language of the rule, these interrupts, don't matter. So now what you're doing is, first thing you see, broad triangle, ignore. Now you read a few rules and there's a bunch of these references, ignore. Now there's a bunch of other stuff, ignore. It's really, it messes with your ability to actually grasp what the rule is trying to tell you.
Right. There's so much interruption.
It's just noise in the
noise in the signal. Yeah.
And then there's often because of this, it's a reliance on. Again, I understand the motivation. There's a notion of never wanting to have the same rule repeated in 2 places, because then if you change it, you've got 2 places to change it. Got it, right?
Yeah.
But there's a pretty heavy reliance on, and if this happens, do this, go see the rule for it. If this happens, go see the rule for it, and things are broken up in ways because of the way the systems are interleaved that make it, there's a pretty heavy reliance on that way of structuring the way the rules communicate. So you have a lot of signals that become noise, and then you also have a lot of this jumping around stuff that is, I wrote software. I understand the structural reason for that, but it makes it difficult. And then there are things just in layout, like what you're talking about. And there are cases where lower level content is in bold and big font, and the header is in smaller font and unbolded. And you're like, well, I can't grab the context very well when that's happening.
In this series, I often don't like the font choices as well. They often use decorative fonts for headers. And it's like, no, those should just be on title pages. Just give us a straightforward, easy to read text when it comes to
exactly.
the rules.
So it has to do with the information transfer, which is the function of the rule book. There's just like a number of things that feel like it get in the way. Now, that having been said, you just try to get off the page. You just try to get off the page as quick as you can.
Well, I want to get off the topic of the rules, but I have we've been at this for over an hour already, and I do want to talk about Inferno
just
a little
having
more.
Fun.
But no, it's all good. But but I guess this is actually a bit of a segue, because now that we're playing Inferno, and I sort of assume the Inferno. I know the Inferno rule book has a front page that says what's different from Nevsky. I don't know if it has what's different from Nevsky and what's different from Almoravid, but I wonder if that rule book has the little brown triangles or yellow triangles or whatever as well.
Yeah,
So,
I've
wondering
actually,
how you're making out with the Inferno rule book.
yeah, I'm. Well, it does have. Yeah, it actually does have the broad triangles.
Yeah, it does,
and everything, and they're doing a different. And there was a discussion on the Discord channel about this. They're doing how it's different from Nevsky, and I've never played that, so that didn't help me in Alvarado, and it didn't help me in Inferno either. You're comparing it to something I don't have, and the more distant Nevsky gets in the series, I don't know how useful that is, and people come in at different points. So it may or may not be the best way to do it. The thing about it is that with Inferno, because the fundamental concepts are locked, and I think this is what happened with a lot of people moving from Nevsky to Almoravid, is like if you got Nevsky, you're going to make a few mistakes in Almoravid because of things that are different, but like mules or something, they're different transport types. But you're going to kind of get it. And then you're going to stumble over a few things the first couple games, and then go, oh, okay, I get it. Like I got to feed mules or whatever it is, Pariahs, the type of politics is a little bit of a different beast because it's a fairly complex subsystem that's new. So, when I start picking up Inferno, a lot of it I was like, okay, I think I get, okay, supply. Oh, okay, it's a little bit different. And, transport, I don't have to worry about multiple types. And, roads and tracks work differently, but it's not hard to, it was the uptake was actually pretty easy. And, I don't totally get there, I don't completely know how to manipulate treachery and revolt to my advantage yet, but I've only played it a few times compared to how many times I play Almoravid. So what happens, I think, is the experienced player in the system doesn't experience the same difficulties moving from game to game that someone new coming in for the first time is going to experience.
Right. But the more I think about it, the more I think that they've tried to make rather, this is kind of a series, but rather than doing that thing where they make a series rule book and then this box exclusive rule book, which I've kind of soured on that experience. I don't know. I kind of like having all the rules in one place.
Yeah,
and
me too.
Levy and Campaign does that. But using the little brown triangles, they do try to at least point up where things have changed in case you're prone to thinking it's all going to work the way it used to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a don't trip on this queue, right? It's a don't trip here, right? And I understand the motivation. Again, though, if Inferno was the first game that I came into of the series, and I agree with you, I think it's a good entry point. I really do. I would have been, again, a little bit. It's just a noise symbol to anybody who hadn't played the other game. It's just a noise symbol, So,
But the thing is, if you're trying to decide whether to put it in or not, the little bit of noise symbol is probably worth it compared to what you'd lose where you are actually helping the players who've played the one or two of the previous games in the series.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's each decision. I understand why they're doing it. It's just that for me, coming in again, Almoravid, I think, is so far could be the most complex of the series, honestly. And I mean, transport is really weird in Nevsky. I think that's a more complicated.
Yeah, but it's not as complicated as the type of politics stuff. I don't think.
Right. And so it's I think I came in at a difficult point, and the fact I survived it all. I think that for each decision, I can see why it was made. It's not like this is a dumb idea. It's not so much that. Well, there's some things with the font, and so forth, but don't make that much sense. And the taxonomy, there are places where the outline structure just goes wacko, and you're like, I don't get why they're doing that. But highlighting those differences, and even what I call the back refs, the references to rules that have been previously introduced. I see the motivation. To me, if you're not adding a piece of information that the person reading the rule at that point needs to know. If it's not really material, if it's something like, victory marker is a cylinder on a track or something, it just seems like most people who are playing games at that level, they don't need to see a reference to that every time somebody mentions VPs or whatever it is. That's
no.
the thought. But
another way I've seen it done that is less distracting is that everything like that is in the index, and then what they do is any word that's in the index in a rule, they might bold or italicize that word just to let you know that if you need more info, go to the index.
Right, and that way it doesn't disrupt the scanning of the rule. The language.
And you can just read the rule.
That's right. Exactly.
That's right.
And that could actually help a lot. But just as a point of reference is, I enjoy playing the PAX series. Phil Eplin's, Ion Games PAX series. But literally, for most of the titles, I either had to make my own rule book, or I had to find someone who had redone the rule book on Board Game Geek in the file section, because it just was too hard to parse. It was just a difficult parse for me. And I found the games weren't actually that tough. Now, I'm not talking about PAX Premier. That's a different animal. PAX Premier, second edition, totally different animal. But I'm talking about the Eklund games. It was just a tough parse. And there were a lot of reasons for it. But, I just found that.
Just personally, the Eklund games, I find myself throwing the rule book against the wall whenever I read his footnotes, because his whole libertarian objectivism just drives me crazy.
Yeah. But the thing about it too is that, part of the reason why I had to either rewrite or find a rewrite of the PAX series rules was I can't read a font that small anymore. I can't do it.
Well, that's part of that's part of their deal there, right? Like every game has to fit in that size box with that.
They're doing big bucks now, but they're doing big bucks now. But it used to be just ridiculous, So yeah. But so
to bring it back to what we were talking about, though, as much as we have struggled with the Levy and Campaign game rules, here we are playing each other in our second or third game of Inferno. So we're like, we've chopped our way through it, and it's been frustrating. But part of it's frustrating in how the rules are presented, and part of it's just these are two totally new concepts, and I have to forget a lot of what I already know about wargaming to grok this.
Yeah, well, a way of understanding where I am with any game is if I look at my Vassal games. What do I have going on? And right now I have 3 or 4 Almoravid. I have 3 or 4 Inferno, and then I have 2 or 3 Blind Swords, and that's pretty much the mix at the moment. And so, I'm looking forward to. I'm hoping that maybe at SD HisCon I might actually get a little crack at Plantagenet, because I'm curious. The rulebook is actually smaller on that one, and it might be a little tighter design. And so I'm wondering if that might, and it kind of comes at it from a little bit different angle. And so I think that's really interesting. So, I
haven't, but I have not looked at the rule book yet. So I really,
and I don't know if you want to bring it, or, if you,
I'll bring it. Just in case.
So, and I might be able to acquire a copy prior, but something, it has been worth the journey. And again, Charles, Nevsky won, Charles Roberts, Almoravid won, Charles Roberts, and Volko got the Hall of Fame this year, right? So, these are, it's worth paying attention to what's happening in these games, right? And they are different from anything else.
I'm much less focused with you. I have as many PBEM games going on, probably a dozen different opponents, but 9 or 8 different games.
Oh, well, that's it's part of your job, honestly.
Well, it keeps me up on games to talk about on the podcast.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Is it's casting a wide net is part of being a content creator.
It's just not. It doesn't make for being a good player.
Well, I don't know. You're killing me at a greater victory. You're just killing me. It's just ridiculous,
I beat you in the one game of Inferno, but I had wicked good cards, and things fell my way that game.
Yes, yeah. The worm may have turned in our second game.
Yeah.
I had a couple lucky breaks, so I'd rather be lucky than good in some ways.
No, that was it was like, oh, he's going to do that. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
I'm in the deep doo-doo.
Yeah. But that's the thing is, there's a good interview on Board Game Geek on Cardboard Creations of Harold Buchanan. I think it got posted today or yesterday or something, and leading up to SD Hist and so forth. And he talks about making a game that was about a topic, but the feedback he got was it wasn't fun. And what that crystallized for me was this notion of the two parts of the continuum communicate something about history and does it with some veracity. And it's a fun play experience. It has dynamic decisions, there's tension, it builds curiosity about other approaches, whatever it is, that's the fun part over here. There's a lot of attributes to the fun part. And what's happened is I'm having fun. It's weird fun, but I'm having fun playing Almoravid. I'm having fun playing Inferno. My opponents are enjoying the games, right? We're both having fun. It's a shame that I don't get to play more of these, face-to-face over the table. There may be ways to seek that out more. But, and cons is one way to do it. But I think there may be other opportunities in Southern California here. But I'm having fun playing them now. I think part of it is I got part of it figured out, and I'm like, hey, okay, no, can I actually do something with this? Could I win a game once, please?
That's very similar to our journey with Blind Swords, right? At the very beginning, we were just like stumbling into each other, shooting each other, close assaulting each other, getting completely whacked because, I guess I need more than what I brought to the party.
Also patience, patience.
Yeah,
because you got to rebuild the
I
valley
need patience.
sometimes.
That's right. Yeah. But then we're good at it now.
Yeah.
I mean, the mechanics of it.
Right. And in a similar vein, I mean, the thing that wargaming has is this notion of franchise, right? Which is a system will come out, and if it's good, you have a ticket to every game in the series. And that ticket is that you probably have a pretty good idea how it works. Blind Sword games, the scale varies, right? How many movement points to do this or that, whatever, the terrain is different, that kind of thing. That you go, okay, this one a little bit different. Okay, got it. But you got a ticket to all of them. And if it's a fun system where you enjoy it, you feel like you're getting something out of it on a learning level that's worth it. Sometimes it's just to have fun, but other times it's because it's teaching you something, and putting you in a.
And the other thing about the Blind Swords thing was it was like that made me go, oh, I got to get more of Herman Luttman's games. I dig this designer, so that led me to starting to play A Most Fearful Sacrifice, and then thinking, well, I got to look at some of his 18th century games or 19th century games as well.
Right. Well, and I think I've got a couple of his sci-fi games. I mean, he does, he's done some crazy stuff too.
He's got a new sci-fi game coming out. It's not going to be for me, but I think it's going to be a big hit.
Yeah, the Zombie Island or whatever it is,
I don't know what it's called.
Plum Island. Plum Island.
Plum Island, yeah. It's coming,
which is really interesting because what he did was he took the the Dunkirk game, which is about leaving, and he repurposed that to this sort of horror theme. Yeah. So it's like, that's great, so it's a big world.
Well, let's finish up by talking a little bit more about Inferno and what we're liking it or what we're finding in the game, or what you're liking about it more than Almoravid, or is there anything about Almoravid that you miss that's not in Inferno?
Well, they're not. It's not so much that. I mean, it's they're different. The learning experience in Almoravid is to try to figure out the asymmetry is to try to figure out when you play the Muslim side, what can I be effective doing? Like what I can't try to do what the Christian player is doing. It's not going to work. And so I have to learn how to be effective with what I can do in those games. And also, a big part of it is learning how to effectively bring the African lords into play. And again, it's not just bringing them into play; it's being effective with them, like getting them somewhere where it mattered that they came into play.
Yeah.
And it's difficult, and it takes a certain amount of learning. In Inferno, it's just so much more. It just feels so much more dynamic. You're closer. I think it feels like the protagonists or antagonists are closer to each other in some ways. I think you engage quicker. It feels like the troop differentiation actually might be a pretty important part of the game, is trying to figure out, these guys ravage better. Oh, okay, I need to, like, go with your strength, find out what your strength is. And also, I haven't played any longer scenarios. And I think these games do open up I think the one we're playing now actually is a fair number of turns, actually.
Yeah, but it's still not we're not onto the big one yet.
Right. And it makes such a difference because you're planning arc changes in the campaign games. And I think that's an important aspect the game is trying to communicate. But when I first started playing Inferno, I thought, well, this one is just a rollicking good time. It's a little bit easier to get your brain around. It's a little less punishing. Well, it's not. It's a little less punishing to try to be what the other guy is, because the other guy, it's less differentiated. So it's not a problem with that. It's less asymmetrical. There is something about that thick web in Almoravid that I'm really enjoying trying to tease it out, though. So they're both. I'm enjoying playing both. I think Plantagenet might be super fun to play. I don't know that I need to be playing everything in the canon. Like I don't know if that's going to be required, because there's going to be a lot of it, and I don't know. We'll see if they're quick to pick up and transition to it, might be different. But as we were just talking a moment ago, because I don't have to cast a wide net so much, I can do deep dives into some game and play a lot, and it's really that I really enjoy doing that. So. So yeah, taking a lot of cracks. Well, like I said, I think I played Imperial Struggle like maybe 40 times or something, and I mean, people have played it over 100. But I'm saying, you really do you finally get a feel what's really happening when you can play something a lot like that. So thank you, Vassal.
I think in terms of Inferno versus Nevsky, what I find with Inferno is, like you said, the players, the two sides are less asymmetric. They feel more equal at the beginning. In Nevsky, one side is stronger at the beginning and has to kind of play a waiting game for their better lords to show up to balance things out. So there's one side that you got to kind of play the rope-a-dope game a bit at the beginning, and then of course you're fighting the weather and always having the wrong.
Well, that actually sounds really interesting. I mean, I guess I didn't realize that was the nature of the asymmetry, and that was temporal.
Yeah. I mean, that's been my. I've played the big campaign a couple times now, and that's been my feeling. Is if you're, I can't remember what the two sides are called, but the one side you do have to wait. If you try to tangle with the other side too quickly, you're just going to get stomped. And
2 times in Bruce, is it? 2 times.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yep.
So, and the other thing is with this Inferno game, the map, it seems to have more there just seems to be a lot more places to go on the map, even though it's about the same size board. But there's the strongholds in the cities there's more of them. They're closer together, so that it feels like, I could go here, I could go there, I could go there. In Nevsky, there's a bit like, well, I go either here or there, or from this stronghold I go here or there.
Right.
So it does feel even more sandboxy, at least in the beginning plays.
Yeah, it feels more open. Almoravid, the general geography situation is that you have the Muslim lords arrayed around the bottom of the map, and you have a big central location that is the kind of contested area in a way. But often that will be a difficult nut for the Muslim side to directly. You're not, again, you just go. you get stopped pretty easy if you just decide you're going to go in there and think you're going to take it, right? And
Right.
then you have the Christians coming down from the top, so you have an interesting geographical structure there. And in Inferno, it just felt like it's just wide open. I mean, I can engage in a lot of different places, you know.
Yeah, totally.
So,
I think that'll make it more, in some ways, an easier entrance as well. Because
oh yeah, absolutely.
Because it doesn't feel like there's bad, wrong choices.
Right.
In terms of looking forward,
I'll find them though.
Yeah,
I'll find them. Yeah.
I like the Plantagenet. It's going to be an interesting game to play for sure. I'm looking forward to the Seljuk one. I think that's at Constantinople. I think that's maybe where that's set. So that's,
and again, the other bookend of the era, right? Because the beginning
and a chunk of history that we in the West often don't spend as much time with.
Right. And again, what happened there too is I think the scale is quite a bit different. I think the units there go from being in the hundreds to being in the thousands per block.
Per block.
So they're big.
Right.
These are bigger armies that are happening. I think the whole thing just scales up. But
we're way later in the period. But just as a final thing to talk about before we finish up, what I wanted to ask you about is with those 22 other games that are possibilities of the pipeline that are being discussed. Yeah. Pick out two or three that have caught your interest and you hope make it to the finish line. I mean, if you can, I know.
Yeah, I have this weird. It might be imposter syndrome, but I don't feel qualified in a way because I am not as well versed in the history. So, in many cases, the first time I will have understood that conflict even happened was when I see someone, positing it on the channel. I think I am very curious about the extension into ancients. Epipolae. And so whether the system transports to an earlier period will be an interesting thing. We were able to meet the designer of Seljuk at the warehouse event, the first warehouse event that we went to. And he's a great guy, and I think it's a great effort that he's doing there and so forth. So I think that one will be, I think that'll be really interesting. But it's not so much, hang on. I don't have Discord up. There was one coming that's a fairly new arrival that is set in, it's in North Africa, and it's sort of Muslim history, Abbasids, I believe they're called. And that topic resonated with me because of some deep dives I've been doing on history of the development of that faith. So it's just something that happened to trigger, I've been reading about that. So that's really interesting that that's happening there. But otherwise, it's not so much that.
Have you seen is anybody working on the intersection of these medieval lords with Vikings?
I haven't seen anything like that. But it could be. I mean, 22 titles. It's a little hard to keep up with what's going on with all of them. I haven't seen anything quite about that. The Pax Viking game from Ion, really interesting take on that exact problem because it depicts Vikings in terms of their trade and interaction with the cultures rather than them as the ravagers of coastlines. It's a really different take. It's a really interesting take. So that's something.
Yeah, no, it's the actual history.
Through some lens, but yeah.
Well, cool, Will. This has been great. I think we've given a pretty good overview of what our current thoughts are.
Yeah,
on Levy and Campaign. I look forward to seeing you in San Diego, but of course I'll talk to you before then as we continue both our Inferno and our Blind Swords games.
Yep.
And I'll hit you up for a report on GMT West because you're going to go to that before we meet up in San Diego.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Well, I hope you like that. I should note that I saw Volko quite involved in a Twitter thread recently about how to improve rulebook writing. No surprise, really, that he's trying to get better at something that he's already near the top of the list on. So, let me know what you thought of the interview. Wargame interviews are generally with designers, but I've been thinking since long before I started this podcast that it might be interesting to hear more from players. Let me know if you think that's something you'd like me to explore. Bouquets. Well, I'd like to give a shout out to everyone who stopped by our Discord channel or the website or emailed me about the uncomfortable history essay last episode. Whether they agreed with me or each other or not, everyone was calm and respectful, and the discussion was measured and reasoned. There was no yelling, no overheated emotions, sort of like what we wish the internet was like all the time. It's great to be able to have that. It's in direct opposition to the yelling and shouting we saw on Board Game Geek or Facebook about the same topic. So thanks to all who participated. And finally, parting shots. As I record this, I'm preparing to head out on the highway in a few days to go to San Diego for a gaming convention. It's a very long drive, 24 hours driving, plus sleeping and eating. So I'll have plenty of time to think, plenty of time to listen to podcasts and book tapes, whatever. But no amount of preparation will make that initial entry into the convention any easier. Even though I've spent my adult life as an actor and I do things like this podcast, I'm very nervous in unfamiliar situations and around new people. It got me thinking about one of the things I've always liked about the wargaming community. It reminds me of the theater community in many ways. Mostly in that they're both very open, accepting of people who don't quite fit in elsewhere. People who may be socially awkward. People who may be too loud and don't know it or don't care. People who are just not an average size. People who look different. People whose politics don't fit the mainstream. People who don't want to conform. Wargaming has always accepted all those people. I mean, they'll even accept you if you're just an average, regular person. I've always loved that about it. So, even though I'll be incredibly nervous going in, I'll go in knowing that I'm meeting people from my own tribe. And there will probably be plenty of others there who are just as shy and nervous as I am. I'm going to try and make a point of searching a few of those out and say hello. If you see me, feel free to do the same. We're all in this together. Thanks for listening. Again, you can reach me at grant@pushingcardboard.com, at the website or Discord server, or even on Twitter at cardboardpusher. I'd love to hear from you. Oh, and don't forget to go to the website and find podcast surveys. It's under the podcast menu item. Fill out the survey and be entered for a draw for a free game. I think the game I'm sending out is Saladin by Shakos. Check it out. Next episode will mark 2 years of doing the podcast. I hope you'll join me again for that one. See you then.